Commander Takeo Yoshikawa, sits in a cramped office in the Naval General Staff building, staring at a document that should terrify every Japanese officer who reads it. The intelligence report, compiled from multiple sources including decoded American communications, prisoner interrogations, and reconnaissance of American shipyards, contains a number so absurd that Yoshikawa has triple-checked every calculation. According to their best estimates, the United States Navy has either completed, under construction, or authorized the building of over 150 aircraft carriers of various types. The report breaks down the numbers with methodical precision. 24 large Essex-class fleet carriers, 9 Independence-class light carriers converted from cruiser hulls, and more than 120 escort carriers being mass-produced from merchant ship designs. Yoshikawa underlines the Essex-class numbers. 24 fleet carriers, each displacing over 27,000 tons and capable of operating Noventa aircraft, each one more capable than Japan's best carriers. The construction timeline is equally disturbing. American shipyards are completing these massive vessels in 14 to 20 months. Japan's sole purpose-built carrier currently under construction, the Taiho, has already taken over 2 years and won't be finished for another 6 months. The math is simple and devastating. If the Americans complete even half of their planned carrier construction, they will possess more carrier tonnage than Japan, Britain, and Germany combined. If they complete the full program, American naval aviation will be 10 times larger than anything Japan can field. Yoshikawa has spent 3 years analyzing American industrial capacity. He knows these numbers are possible. American shipbuilding operates on principles completely foreign to Japanese naval construction. Where Japan carefully crafts each vessel over years, American yards have industrialized the process. They use prefabricated sections, standardized designs, and multiple shifts working around the clock. The evidence is overwhelming. American newspapers openly publish photographs of carrier launchings. Radio intercepts reveal coordination between dozens of shipyards. Reconnaissance photographs show carrier hulls at various stages of construction from Philadelphia to San Francisco. Even allowing for deception and exaggeration, the scale of American production is unprecedented in naval history. But when Yoshikawa submits his report to Vice Admiral Fukudome, chief of the Operations Bureau, the response is immediate and dismissive. This is American psychological warfare, Fukudome declares, tossing the report back across his desk. They want us to believe they can build carriers like automobiles. It's designed to break our will. Yoshikawa tries to explain his methodology. The shipyard capacity exists. The steel production numbers support it. The workforce mobilization matches the construction timeline. Every data point confirms the estimate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Fukudome cuts him off. I fought in the Russo-Japanese War. I have studied naval warfare for 40 years. No nation in history has built more than a handful of fleet carriers. The British have been building carriers since 1918 and have only 12. We have devoted our entire national effort to naval construction and have built 9 fleet carriers over 2 decades. And the Americans, Fukudome continues, his voice hardening, are supposedly building 24 in less than 3 years, while also building thousands of other ships, while equipping armies in Europe and Africa, while sending supplies to Russia and China. He shakes his head. It's impossible. Your sources have been deceived. The dismissal reflects a broader institutional blindness within Japanese naval command. Throughout 1943, intelligence reports about American industrial mobilization are systematically downgraded or rejected when they contradict preferred assumptions about enemy capabilities. Captain Atsushioi, serving in the operations section, later recalls the atmosphere. We had become accustomed to calculating American strength based on pre-war industrial capacity. When intelligence suggested production had increased 5-fold or 10-fold, we assumed the reports were exaggerated. It was psychologically easier to believe our enemies were lying than to accept that we had fundamentally miscalculated the war. The institutional resistance to intelligence has deep roots. Japanese naval culture values operational planning over intelligence analysis. The most talented officers compete for command positions or operational staff roles. Intelligence is considered a supporting function, often assigned to competent but unexceptional officers. Major General Hiroshi Oshima, Japanese, military, attaché in Berlin, sends similar warnings from Germany. He has access to European intelligence on American production and repeatedly cables Tokyo that American shipbuilding has reached unprecedented levels. His reports receive polite acknowledgement but no action. The fundamental problem is cognitive rather than analytical. Japanese leadership has convinced themselves that Western democracies, particularly America, lack the discipline and unity for total war mobilization. This belief is reinforced by every aspect of Japanese propaganda and military indoctrination. Officers are taught that American culture is soft, individualistic, and focused on material comfort. How could such a society possibly mobilize millions of workers for coordinated industrial effort? How could Americans, who think primarily about personal profit, subordinate individual interests to national goals? The ideology creates a perfect trap. Any intelligence suggesting American mobilization is more extensive than expected is automatically suspect because it contradicts fundamental assumptions about American character. Officers who insist the intelligence is accurate are viewed as defeatist or psychologically weak. Yoshikawa makes one more attempt to force recognition of the threat. In November 1943, he prepares a detailed briefing with photographs, production statistics, and projections of American carrier strength at 6-month intervals through 1945. His projections show that by mid-1944, the United States Navy will have approximately 15 Essex-class carriers operational, supported by 8 or 9 light carriers and over 50 escort carriers. By the end of 1944, those numbers will climb to 20 Essex-class, all 9 Independence-class light carriers, and perhaps 80 escort carriers. The briefing includes an organizational chart showing how the Americans are structuring their carrier forces. Instead of dividing carriers between different fleets as Japan does, the Americans are concentrating them into massive task forces. A single American carrier task group by mid-1944 will include 4 or 5 fleet carriers, supported by light carriers, fast battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. 3 or 4 such task groups operating together will field more carrier aircraft than Japan's entire remaining naval aviation strength. The briefing is scheduled for the Naval General Staff's weekly intelligence review. 40 senior officers attend. Yoshikawa presents his findings with as much emotional detachment as possible, focusing on documented facts rather than interpretation. The response is hostile. Admiral Sokichi Takagi, one of the Navy's most respected strategic thinkers, interrupts repeatedly to challenge Yoshikawa's sources and methodology. "You're telling us," Takagi says, his voice dripping with skepticism, "that America will have more carriers operational in 1944 than we have built in our entire history. That a nation which had 8 carriers at the start of the war will have over 100 carriers in service within 3 years? The bulk are escort carriers," Yoshikawa clarifies, "smaller vessels with limited capability. But yes, the total numbers reach escort carriers, fleet carriers, it makes no difference." Takagi interrupts. "The claim is absurd on its face. Even if we accept that American industrial capacity exceeds ours, which I do not concede, there are physical limitations. Trained crews, pilots, support infrastructure. You cannot simply build ships and expect them to fight effectively. The Americans have solved the training problem." Yoshikawa responds, "Our intelligence indicates they have established massive training facilities throughout their interior. They are processing tens of thousands of pilots and aircrew through—" Yes, we've heard these claims," Fukudome interjects impatiently. "Farm boys from Nebraska learning to fly fighters in 6 months. Factory workers becoming aircraft mechanics after 8 weeks of training. It's propaganda designed to make us think they've overcome limitations that we know are insurmountable. He is ordered to refine his estimates using more conservative assumptions about American industrial capability. He is being told to make the intelligence match what senior commanders want to believe rather than what the evidence shows. Over the following weeks, Yoshikawa attempts to comply. He reviews every source, checking for possible deception or exaggeration. He applies conservative multipliers to every estimate. He assumes that American propaganda photographs show the same ships from different angles. The revised report still shows Americans will have over 100 carriers of all types by the end of 1944. The Essex-class numbers remain at 20 or more. Even with conservative assumptions, American carrier strength will exceed Japan's by a factor of 5 to 1. Fukudome reads the revised report and nods approvingly. "This is more realistic," he says, "though I still suspect you're being too generous with American capabilities." Lieutenant Commander Shigetaka Tominaga, assigned to track American shipyard activity, has compiled detailed records of every carrier launching reported in American newspapers. His documentation shows 14 Essex-class carriers launched between August 1942 and October 1943. 7 more are under construction and will launch by mid-1944. When Tominaga presents this information, he is told that American newspapers are propaganda instruments and cannot be trusted as intelligence sources. The fact that every launch is photographed, that ships are named publicly, that commissioning ceremonies are broadcast on radio, none of this matters. Mechanism at work is simple but devastating. Japanese officers are not stupid or incompetent. They are trapped by an ideological framework that makes accurate intelligence assessment impossible. They have been trained to believe that Japan possesses inherent advantages in discipline, fighting spirit, and tactical skill that offset any material disadvantage. Accepting that America can simply outproduce Japan by 10 to 1, ratios requires acknowledging that the war may be unwinnable. That acknowledgement is psychologically forbidden. By December 1943, Yoshikawa has stopped trying to convince his superiors. He continues preparing intelligence reports because that is his duty, but he knows they will be filed and forgotten. The numbers he documents will be dismissed as enemy propaganda until American carriers appear in battle in numbers that can no longer be denied. In one of his final reports for 1943, Yoshikawa includes a single paragraph that will haunt him for the rest of his life. If American carrier production proceeds as intelligence suggests, Japanese naval aviation will face overwhelming numerical superiority by mid-1944. Victory in carrier engagements will require Japanese pilots to achieve kill ratios of 1:0 to 1 or higher merely to achieve tactical stalemate. Such ratios have never been sustained in naval aviation history and seem unlikely given reported improvements in American pilot training and aircraft quality. This assessment is submitted not as defeatism, but as factual analysis of force ratios based on available intelligence. The paragraph is deleted by his superiors before the report reaches the combined fleet staff. The official version reads, "American carrier construction continues but remains within manageable parameters. Japanese naval aviation retains qualitative superiority that will prove decisive in future engagements." Yoshikawa keeps a personal copy of his original report. He will carry it through the rest of the war as a private record of an opportunity lost, a moment when truth was available, but rejected because it was too terrible to accept. Philippine Sea. El 19 de junio de 1944, Admiral Jisaburo Osawa stands on the bridge of his flagship Taiho, watching the horizon through binoculars as the first wave of his aircraft disappears toward the American fleet. He has committed 430 carrier aircraft to this battle, nearly every operational plane in the combined fleet's carrier arm. Victory here will cripple American naval power in the Central Pacific and give Japan the breathing room it desperately needs. Osawa's intelligence briefings have told him what to expect. The Americans have perhaps 6 or 7 fleet carriers in the area, supported by several light carriers. Total enemy strength is estimated at 400 to 500 aircraft. His own force includes 9 carriers with experienced pilots who have trained specifically for this engagement. The odds favor Japan. To refuse to believe is that he is about to engage 15 American fleet carriers, supported by numerous light carriers and escort carriers. The American task force includes more than 900 aircraft, and they are waiting for him with radar-directed fighter defenses and proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells. The disparity between what Ozawa expects and what he faces represents the culmination of Japanese intelligence failure. For 2 years, reports about American carrier construction have been dismissed as propaganda. Now those impossible carriers are about to destroy Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. Aboard USS Lexington, one of the Essex-class carriers that supposedly didn't exist in such numbers, radar operator Lieutenant Joseph Edgar watches green blips appear on his screen at 0957 hours, a massive raid approaching from the west. More aircraft than he has ever seen on a single contact. He immediately sounds the alarm. Within minutes, are airborne. The Essex, Lexington, Yorktown, Bunker Hill, Hornet, Wasp, Enterprise, and 7 other fleet carriers launch their entire fighter complements. The carriers that Japanese intelligence insisted couldn't all be operational simultaneously are now coordinating the largest fighter defense in naval history. The battle that follows, later known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, destroys 374 Japanese aircraft in a single day. American losses total 29 planes, most from operational accidents, but the statistics of the air battle, devastating as they are, matter less than what the engagement reveals about Japanese intelligence failure. Commander Takeo Yoshikawa, now serving on the combined fleet staff, receives preliminary battle reports that evening. The numbers are catastrophic, but one detail catches his attention. American pilots are reporting encounters with aircraft from at least 12 different carriers. The intelligence section has identified Essex, Lexington, Yorktown, Bunker Hill, Hornet, Wasp, Bataan, Monterey, Cabot, and several others. 12 carriers, in a single task force. The exact scenario Yoshikawa had warned about in his dismissed intelligence reports. He pulls out his November 1943 briefing, the one that had been rejected as enemy propaganda, and compares it to the current battle reports. His projections had estimated King's Essex-class carriers operational by mid-1944. The Americans have 14, with another commissioning next month. He had estimated 8 or 9 light carriers. The Americans have exactly 9. His intelligence estimates from 6 months ago, the ones that were rejected as impossible, match reality almost perfectly. The Americans didn't hide their carrier construction. They announced every launching. They published photographs. They broadcast commissioning ceremonies. Japanese intelligence simply refused to believe the evidence. Yoshikawa takes his comparison to Vice Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, Ozawa's chief of staff. Kusaka reads the document in silence, his face growing increasingly grim. Why wasn't this taken seriously? Kusaka finally asks. Yoshikawa chooses his words carefully. The estimates seemed inconsistent with our understanding of American industrial limitations. Senior commanders believed the numbers represented psychological warfare rather than factual reporting. Which commanders specifically? Yoshikawa remains silent. Kusaka understands the implication. The intelligence failures go to the highest levels of the Naval General Staff. Rejecting accurate intelligence wasn't the decision of a single officer, but reflected institutional assumptions that permeated the entire command structure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The battle damage reports make the situation worse. Ozawa has lost 3 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hiyo. The Americans haven't lost a single carrier. Not one. Despite kamikaze attacks, despite torpedo strikes, despite concentrated bombing, the Essex-class carriers proved nearly indestructible. Their armored design, compartmentalized structure, and superior damage control allow them to absorb punishment that would sink any Japanese carrier. Over the following days, Japanese intelligence officers attempt to reconstruct what happened. How did they miss so completely? How did they underestimate American carrier strength by such catastrophic margins? The answer emerges from captured American documents and prisoner interrogations. Congress authorized construction of once Essex-class carriers. In September 1940, they authorized 3 more. Japanese naval attaches in Washington had reported these authorizations. The intelligence reached Tokyo. It was filed and forgotten because no one believed America could actually complete the program. Building 24 fleet carriers seemed as realistic as building 24 battleships, theoretically possible but practically impossible within any reasonable time frame. The miscalculation began with a fundamental misunderstanding of American industrial organization. Japanese shipyards built carriers the way they built all warships, carefully, methodically, with emphasis on craftsmanship and precision. A Japanese carrier took 3 to 4 years from keel laying to commissioning. American carriers, built with prefabricated sections and assembly line techniques, were being commissioned in 18 to 20 months. Lieutenant Commander Shigetaka Tominaga, who had tracked American carrier launches, finally receives permission to present his complete findings. He has documented every Essex-class carrier from authorization to commissioning. The data is irrefutable. USS Essex, laid down el 28 de abril de 1941, commissioned December 31, 1942. Construction time, 20 months. USS Yorktown, laid down el 1 de diciembre de 1941, commissioned el 15 de abril de 1943. Construction time, 16 months. USS Intrepid, laid down el 1 de diciembre de 1941, commissioned el 16 de agosto de 1943. Construction time, 20 months. The pattern repeats across all 14 completed carriers. American shipyards are averaging 18 months from keel to commissioning. Multiple carriers are under construction simultaneously at the same yard. Newport News Shipbuilding has 7 Essex-class carriers on its order book. Bethlehem Steel at Quincy is building 4. But the truly terrifying discovery comes from analyzing American industrial capacity that hasn't yet been fully utilized. The Essex-class construction program uses approximately 40,000 workers across all shipyards. Total American shipyard employment in 1944 is over 1.7 million workers. Less than 3% of American shipbuilding capacity is devoted to Essex-class carriers. Tominaga's briefing. Include a projection that no one wants to hear. If the Americans chose to prioritize carrier construction, if they devoted even 10% of their shipbuilding capacity to fleet carriers, they could theoretically build CN Essex-class carriers within 3 years. The limitation isn't industrial capability. It's strategic choice. The Americans are building just enough carriers to completely dominate the Pacific, while also building thousands of other ships for every other theater. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, who replaced Admiral Koga as Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet in May 1944, reads Tominaga's report with growing disbelief. He summons his intelligence staff for clarification. "You're telling me," Toyoda says slowly, "that the Americans could build CN fleet carriers if they wanted to? That they're deliberately limiting production to only 24 because that's all they need?" "That appears to be the case, sir," Tominaga responds. "American industrial capacity exceeds the requirements of their war strategy. They are building enough carriers to guarantee overwhelming superiority, while simultaneously supporting operations in Europe, producing aircraft for Russia and Britain, and maintaining civilian industrial production." Toyoda sits in silence for nearly a minute. Finally, he speaks. his voice barely above a whisper. How do you fight an enemy with such capacity? How do you defeat a nation that can build 24 fleet carriers as a minor allocation of its industrial strength? No one has an answer. The question isn't rhetorical. It represents the fundamental strategic dilemma facing Japan. Even if Japanese forces achieve tactical victories, even if they sink American carriers, the losses are immediately replaced. Japan's carrier force, by contrast, is irreplaceable. Every ship lost is permanent. Every experienced pilot killed cannot be replaced with someone of equal skill. The intelligence failure extends beyond carrier construction to pilot training. American intelligence, operating from captured Japanese documents, reveals that Japan estimated American pilot training programs produced perhaps 5, 0, 0, 0 to 10, 0, 0, 0 pilots per year. The actual number is over 100, 0, 0, 0. The Americans have industrialized pilot production the same way they industrialized carrier construction. They have built massive training facilities at Pensacola, Corpus Christi, Jacksonville, and a dozen other locations. They recruit pilots not from military academies but from civilian life, taking college students, farm boys, factory workers, and putting them through intensive training programs. Japanese intelligence had reports about these facilities. Prisoners of war described training bases with thousands of students. Intercepted communications mentioned pilot production numbers. All of it was dismissed as exaggeration. How could Americans, supposedly lacking discipline and commitment, train pilots in 18 months who could match Japanese aviators who had trained for 3 or 4 years? The answer, as the Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrated, is that American pilots didn't match Japanese aviators. They exceeded them. Better aircraft, better tactics, better radar, better coordination, and overwhelming numbers meant that individual skill mattered less than systemic superiority. Captain Toshikazu Ome, serving in the operations section, writes a classified assessment after the Philippine Sea battle that circulates only among the most senior commanders. We have based our entire war strategy on assumptions about American industrial capacity that were incorrect by an order of magnitude. Intelligence reports providing accurate assessments were rejected as enemy propaganda. We convinced ourselves that American culture made total war mobilization impossible, and we interpreted all evidence through this lens. We are now confronting the consequences of institutional self-deception. The Americans have not built more carriers than we thought possible. They have built exactly the number their public announcements indicated. We simply refuse to believe them. The assessment reaches Admiral Toyoda, who appends a single sentence before filing it. This analysis is accurate but provides no actionable intelligence for future operations. The carriers that intelligence insisted couldn't all exist simultaneously have demonstrated their existence through overwhelming combat superiority. Acknowledging the intelligence failure doesn't change the strategic situation. Japan still has no answer to American industrial dominance. Yoshikawa, reading Ome's assessment, feels a profound sense of frustration mixed with vindication. He had been right. His intelligence estimates had been accurate. But being right matters nothing when accurate intelligence is rejected as propaganda. In August 1944, Yoshikawa is reassigned to Manila to serve in intelligence analysis for the Philippines theater. Before departing, he compiles one final report on American carrier strength. The document lists every Essex-class carrier commissioned or under construction, with dates and specifications. 15 fleet carriers are now operational. 5 more will commission before the year ends. The 21 Essex-class carrier will commission in early 1945. He adds a footnote that captures the essence of Japanese intelligence failure. American carrier strength was never secret. Every ship was publicly announced, photographed, and documented. Our failure was not insufficient intelligence but unwillingness to accept intelligence that contradicted our assumptions about enemy capabilities. We dismissed facts as propaganda and accepted propaganda as fact. The report is classified and filed. It will be discovered by American intelligence officers after Japan's surrender, providing insight into how an entire military command structure can systematically reject accurate intelligence in favor of comfortable delusions. By October 1944, as the Battle of Leyte Gulf approaches, Japanese intelligence has finally accepted the reality of American carrier superiority. Updated estimates now show 18 fleet carriers operational, with dozens of light and escort carriers providing support. The combined fleet will face this armada with 4 remaining carriers that are little more than decoys. They lack aircraft and trained pilots to effectively operate as combat vessels. The intelligence reports no longer mention American bluffing or propaganda. Instead, they grimly document the overwhelming material superiority Japan must somehow overcome. The moment to act on accurate intelligence was 1943, when changing strategy might have extended the war or created opportunities for negotiated settlement. By late 1944, no amount of accurate intelligence can change the fundamental strategic reality that Japan is fighting an enemy with 10 times its industrial capacity and no prospect of victory exists. Yoshikawa, now in Manila, watches American carriers operate off the Philippine coast with a sense of inevitability. These are the ships he tried to warn about. They're as real as the steel beneath his feet, and they're going to win the war. Manila, October 1944. Commander Takeo Yoshikawa sits in a communications room, listening to radio intercepts from American carrier operations off Leyte Gulf. The voices are casual, confident, reporting tactical situations with the relaxed professionalism of forces that know they control the battle. Yoshikawa has learned to recognize individual American carriers by their call signs and communication patterns. Today, he's tracking at least 8 different Essex-class carriers coordinating strikes against Japanese positions, 8 fleet carriers operating together in a single task force. 2 years ago, Japanese naval commanders insisted such a concentration was impossible. They claimed the Americans lacked the logistics capacity, the coordination capability, and the industrial strength to maintain such forces. Every claim has been proven catastrophically wrong. The turning point came not through intelligence reports, but through undeniable battlefield evidence. When Lieutenant Commander Shigetaka Tominaga had documented 14 Essex-class carriers in mid-1944, senior officers still questioned whether all were truly operational. Perhaps the Americans were cycling the same ships between different theaters to create an illusion of greater strength. Perhaps some were still in training status and couldn't actually fight. The Battle of Leyte Gulf settled those questions with brutal finality. Between October 24 and 26, 1944, American forces committed 17 fleet carriers to combat operations 9 Essex-class, 8 light carriers plus dozens of escort carriers supporting ground operations. Japanese forces, trying to defend the Philippines with every remaining warship, faced an aerial armada that flew over those 000 sorties in 3 days. The results were predictable. Japanese losses included 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 9 destroyers. The material disparity had become so overwhelming that the battle's outcome was never in doubt. But Leyte Gulf revealed something more disturbing than simple numerical superiority. The American carriers demonstrated operational capabilities that Japanese intelligence had considered impossible even in theory. They maintained continuous air cover over multiple task groups simultaneously. They executed night operations with radar-equipped aircraft. They supported ground forces while simultaneously conducting fleet engagements. Every capability had been documented in pre-battle intelligence reports. Every capability had been dismissed as exaggeration. Now, Japanese commanders faced the reality that American carrier doctrine had evolved beyond anything Japan could match. Admiral Takehiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, reads the battle damage reports with growing desperation. His conventional air forces have been destroyed. His bases have been bombed into uselessness. The American carrier task forces operate with impunity, striking targets across the Philippines with overwhelming force. On October 19, Onishi makes a decision born of desperation. If conventional air attacks cannot penetrate American carrier defenses, perhaps suicide attacks can succeed where normal tactics fail. He authorizes the formation of kamikaze units, special attack units, that will deliberately crash their aircraft into American ships. The first organized kamikaze attacks occur on October 25. 5 fighters, loaded with bombs, deliberately crash into American carriers. The escort carrier St. Lo is sunk. Several other carriers are damaged. For the first time since the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japanese aircraft have successfully damaged American carriers. Yoshikawa, monitoring the battle reports, recognizes the kamikaze program as an admission of complete conventional failure. Japan can no longer train pilots capable of executing coordinated attacks. They can no longer produce aircraft competitive with American fighters. They can no longer match American operational tempo. The only remaining option is to throw pilots and aircraft away in suicide attacks, hoping that sheer desperation can achieve what skill and training cannot. The kamikaze program also represents the ultimate vindication of the intelligence reports. Yoshikawa had submitted throughout 1943 and early 1944. He had warned that American material superiority would eventually render conventional tactics obsolete. He had projected that by late 1944, Japanese forces would face impossible odds in any carrier engagement. He had recommended strategic defensive operations designed to make the cost of American advances prohibitively high. All of it had been rejected. Now, with Japanese naval aviation destroyed and conventional resistance impossible, desperate measures became the only option. Through November and December 1944, kamikaze attacks intensify. Hundreds of pilots throw their lives away, deliberately crashing into American ships. The attacks inflict damage, several carriers are hit, destroyers and cruisers are sunk, thousands of American sailors are killed or wounded. But the attacks don't change the strategic situation. For every kamikaze that reaches its target, 10 or 12 are shot down by fighter patrols or anti-aircraft fire, and the Americans keep coming. By January 1945, the intelligence reports, Yoshikawa prepares no longer attempt to track individual carrier movements. There are too many. At any given time, at least 20 Essex-class carriers are operational in the Pacific theater. Light carriers, escort carriers, and newly commissioned fleet carriers bring total American carrier strength to over 100 ships. American carrier forces operate as a continuous presence that can strike anywhere in the Pacific with overwhelming power. In September 1943, when he had reported that Americans planned to build over 150 carriers of all types, his superiors had called it impossible propaganda. Now, in January 1945, American carrier strength exceeds those impossible estimates. The propaganda had been truth. The impossible construction program had been completed ahead of schedule. Vice Admiral Matomi Ugeki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet, writes in his personal diary an admission that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. We have been fighting a war based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions about enemy industrial capacity. Our intelligence indicated American carrier strength would exceed our own. This intelligence as psychological warfare. We were wrong. The Americans have built exactly what they said they would build, and we are paying the price for our institutional refusal to accept reality. The diary entry reflects a broader recognition within Japanese command circles that the intelligence failures weren't simply analytical mistakes. They represented systematic institutional dysfunction rooted in ideology and cultural assumptions. Japanese officers had been trained to believe in Japanese superiority, spiritual superiority, tactical superiority, qualitative superiority, any intelligence suggesting that material quantity could overwhelm qualitative advantages was psychologically inadmissible. Captain Atsushi Oi, reflecting on the war's intelligence failures after Japan's surrender, explains the mechanism. We saw what we wanted to see, and dismissed what we didn't want to see. American newspaper articles about carrier construction were propaganda, prisoner statements about training programs were exaggeration. Reconnaissance photographs showing multiple carriers were deception. We created an elaborate system for rejecting accurate intelligence and accepting comfortable falsehoods. By March 1945, as American forces approach Okinawa with the largest amphibious fleet in history, Japanese intelligence estimates show 20 those Essex-class carriers operational or completing trials. The actual number is 21. After 3 years of catastrophically wrong estimates, Japanese intelligence has finally achieved accuracy, but accuracy matters nothing when the war is already lost. The Okinawa campaign demonstrates American carrier dominance at its peak. 15 fleet carriers plus numerous light and escort carriers support the invasion with continuous air coverage. They fly over 20,000 sorties during the 3-month battle. But they don't come close to defeating the carrier task forces. USS Franklin, an Essex-class carrier, survives the war's most devastating kamikaze attack on el 19 de marzo de 1945. 2 bombs penetrate her flight deck, triggering massive explosions that kill 724 men and wound 265 others. The damage is catastrophic. Fires rage through the hangar deck. Ammunition detonates. The ship lists severely. Any Japanese carrier suffering similar damage would sink within hours. Franklin doesn't sink. Her damage control parties contain the fires. Her engineering crew keeps the engines running. She sails to Brooklyn Navy Yard under her own power for repairs. 3 months later, she's ready to return to combat. The war ends before she can deploy again, but her survival demonstrates why the Essex-class carriers could never be sunk by kamikaze attacks, no matter how many pilots Japan sacrificed. Yoshikawa, now back in Japan and assigned to Homeland Defense Planning, reviews the Franklin incident with professional admiration, mixed with despair. Japanese carriers were designed for offensive power, speed, aircraft capacity, strike range. American carriers were designed to survive compartmentalized damage control, redundant systems, armored structures. It's another example of American design philosophy, optimized for industrial war, while Japanese philosophy remained optimized for decisive battle. In July 1945, American carrier forces steamed directly to Japan's coast, bombing cities and bombarding shore installations with impunity. The final irony is complete. The combined fleet, which had attacked Pearl Harbor with 6 carriers in December 1941, no longer exists. Japan has a handful of damaged carriers that can't operate for lack of aircraft and pilots. The Americans have over 40 fleet carriers and light carriers operating in Japanese waters, with dozens more in reserve or completing construction. On el 15 de agosto de 1945, when Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender, Yoshikawa listens to the radio, broadcast in the intelligence office. The emperor speaks of enduring the unendurable and accepting surrender to preserve the nation. But Yoshikawa thinks about the intelligence reports that were rejected, the warnings that were dismissed, the accurate estimates that were called propaganda. 3 days after surrender, Admiral Takagi sends for Yoshikawa. The admiral who had aggressively challenged Yoshikawa's carrier estimates in November 1943 now wants to talk about intelligence failures. They meet in Takagi's office, which is nearly empty. Staff officers have been dismissed. Files have been burned. The apparatus of command is dissolving. I owe you an apology, Takagi says without preamble. Your estimates were accurate. Mine were not. I accused you of accepting enemy propaganda. In fact, I was believing our own propaganda and rejecting intelligence. Yoshikawa bows slightly. The fault was institutional, not personal, sir. We all believed what we were trained to believe. That's generous, Takagi responds. But wrong. We had accurate intelligence. We chose to reject it because accepting it would have required acknowledging that the war strategy was flawed from the beginning. That acknowledgement was professionally impossible. It would have meant admitting that attacking America was a catastrophic miscalculation. Takagi pulls out a folder containing Yoshikawa's original. November 1943, briefing the one that estimated 24 Essex-class carriers, and over 100 total carriers by 1945. You were correct about everything. The number of carriers, the construction timeline, the pilot training capacity, the operational doctrine. Every single estimate was accurate or conservative, and we dismissed all of it. Even with accurate intelligence, Japan couldn't match American production. No, Takagi agrees. But we might have pursued different strategies if we had accepted reality earlier. Defensive operations designed to make the American advance prohibitively costly. Negotiated settlements before the situation became hopeless. Resource allocation focused on homeland defense rather than futile offensive operations. He shakes his head. We might have lost anyway, but we would have lost with fewer casualties and less destruction if we had accepted intelligence over ideology. The conversation reflects a broader reckoning within Japanese military circles after surrender. Officers who had dismissed intelligence reports now confronted documentary evidence of American carrier production. The ships that supposedly couldn't exist were photographed in ports across the Pacific. The pilots who supposedly couldn't be trained were flying occupation duty. American occupation forces, interrogating Japanese intelligence officers, expressed genuine confusion about how Japan's estimates could have been so catastrophically wrong. Didn't Japanese intelligence read American newspapers? Didn't they track ship launches? Didn't they analyze intercepted communications? The answer was always the same. Yes, we had the information. We rejected it because it contradicted what we believed about American capabilities and character. We thought we were detecting propaganda. We were actually rejecting truth. One American interrogator, after hearing multiple Japanese officers describe their institutional blindness, made an observation that Yoshikawa never forgot. You didn't lose the war because of bad intelligence. You lost because you couldn't accept good intelligence. The information was there. You just couldn't believe it. Yoshikawa, writing his memoirs decades later, reflected on the intelligence failures with hard-won wisdom. We were not stupid. We were ideological. We had constructed an elaborate framework for understanding American capabilities, and that framework was completely wrong. Every piece of intelligence that contradicted the framework was rejected. Every piece that confirmed it was accepted. We built an entire war strategy on comfortable delusions, and we paid the price in hundreds of thousands of lives and total national defeat. The story of Japan's intelligence failure regarding American carrier production offers enduring lessons about the dangers of institutional groupthink, the power of ideology to distort perception, and the catastrophic consequences of rejecting intelligence that contradicts preferred narratives. The Americans never hid their carrier construction. They announced every ship, published photographs, held commissioning ceremonies. Japanese intelligence documented all of it, but documentation without acceptance is worthless. The 24 Essex-class carriers that Japanese commanders insisted couldn't all exist became the backbone of American naval dominance in the Pacific. They participated in every major campaign from 1943 to 1945. They sank hundreds of Japanese ships, destroyed thousands of aircraft, and supported amphibious operations across the Pacific. They were real. They were overwhelming, and they had been predicted by intelligence reports that were dismissed as American propaganda until battlefield evidence made denial impossible. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these. Up, Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.